As the ammonia absorbs heat from the surrounding water, gradually the tanks of water become blocks of ice. By the 1880s, many towns across America had ice plants like this one, which could produce 150 tons of ice a day. For the first time, artificially produced ice was threatening the natural ice trade created by Frederick Tudor. America's appetite for ice was insatiable. Slaughterhouses, breweries, and food warehouses all needed ice. Animals were disassembled on production lines in Chicago, and the meat was loaded into ice-cooled boxcars to be shipped by railroad.
Livestock on its way to the great meat-packing centers of the nation, to markets everywhere. Food of every sort, safely and quickly delivered in refrigerator cars.
From New York to Los Angeles, restaurants were able to serve fresh steaks thousands of miles from where their meals once roamed. As fruit and vegetables became available out of season, urban diets improved, making city dwellers the best-fed people in the world. And to keep everything fresh at home, the Iceman made his weekly delivery to recharge the refrigerator.
Refrigeration makes a tremendous difference in people's lives. First of all, in the diet, what is possible for them to eat. They can go to the store once a week. They don't have to go every day. They can obtain at that store foods that are from almost anywhere in the world that have been transported and kept cool, and then they can keep them in their own home.
Eventually, the Iceman disappeared as more and more households bought electric fridges. These used the same basic principles as the old ice-making machines. Heat from the food inside is drained away by the evaporating coolant and is dumped out the back. The electric pump drives this cycle of compression, evaporation, and condensation. And that's how the fridge got its hum.
The electric power companies loved refrigerators because they ran all day and all night. They may not have used that much power for each hour, but they continued to use that. So one of the ways that they sold rural electrification was the possibility of having your own refrigerator.
In the early days, the fridge's icebox was used to freeze water, nothing else. Freezing was seen as having the same damaging effects as frost. The man who had changed this idea forever was a scientist and explorer called Clarence Birdseye. In 1912, Birdseye set off on an expedition to Labrador, and the temperature dropped to 40 degrees below freezing. The Inuit had taught Birdseye how to ice fish.
You get a hole out in the ice which could be several feet thick, and you fish with a pole and a line down below and bring the fish up. And as you do that, he found that they would freeze in this terribly cold air almost before they hit his shoulder. When you went to cook this fish, it tasted just as good as fresh. And he couldn't figure that out because when he froze fish at home, they would taste terrible. So when he got back home, he finally tried to figure out what was the difference between this quick freezing and the usual freezing.
Under closer examination, he could see what was happening to the fish cells. With slow freezing, large ice crystals formed, which distorted and ruptured the cells. When thawed, the tissue collapsed, and all the nutrients and flavor washed away.
That's the mushy strawberry syndrome. People freeze the strawberries that they pick in their garden, and then they put them out on the table the next day, and they collapse. They're all mushy.
But with fast freezing, only tiny ice crystals were formed inside the cells, and these caused little damage. It was all down to the speed of the freezing zone.
What Birdseye found out is if you can get through this zone very quickly, flash freezing or quick freezing, you avoid this ice crystallization. And that makes it possible for the food, when it's unfrozen and cooked to taste just as good as fresh.
The basic concept was simple, but it took Clarence Birdseye another 10 years to perfect a commercial fast-freezing technique that would mimic the natural process he had experienced in Labrador. In 1924, he opened a flash freezing plant in Gloucester, Massachusetts, that froze freshly landed fish at minus 45 degrees.
And he then extended that to all sorts of other kinds of meats and produce and vegetables, and almost single-handedly invented the frozen food industry.
Fridges and freezers would eventually become icons of modern living. But there was a less visible cold transformation happening at the same time. This would also have a huge impact on urban living. The cooling of the air itself. 3 centuries had passed since Cornelis Drebbel had shaken King James in Westminster. Now, at the dawn of the 20th century, air cooling was about to shake the world.
Tell me, what is the lowdown on this air conditioning thing?
Now you've started something by asking me that.
Air conditioning was about to transform America, and the person responsible was Willis Carrier, whose important breakthrough passed into comfort cooling mythology.
Let's go back to that foggy night when a young engineer named Willis Carrier sought the answer to a problem: the effects of humidity, of moist air, on industrial production.
Fog. Maybe that's the answer. Let's see. Fog is water vapor that's been condensed. That's because the air has become cooler, and cool air can't hold as much moisture as warm air. Maybe that's the way to reduce humidity. Cool the air and condense the moisture. It might work.
Control of humidity through control of temperature. That was Willis Carrier's idea.
Carrier is sent to Brooklyn for a very special job in 1902. The company that publishes the magazine Judge, one of the most popular full-color magazines in America at this particular time, is having a huge problem. It's July in Brooklyn, and the ink for which they use on their beautiful covers is sliding off the pages. It will not stick because the humidity is too high. Carrier, using some principles that he's been developing as a young new employee of this fan company, finds a way to get out the July 1902 run of the Judge magazine, and from there he begins to eventually build his air conditioning empire.
The demand for air conditioning gradually grew. In the 1920s, movie houses were among the first to promote the benefits. People would flock there in summer to shelter from the heat.
The movies are wildly popular, and the air conditioning certainly helps to attract an audience, especially if they happen to be walking down the street on a horribly hot day and they duck into this movie theater and have this wonderful experience.
Air conditioning became increasingly common in the workplace too, particularly in the South, where textile and tobacco factories were almost unbearable without cooling.
When employees breathe good air and feel comfortable, they work faster and do a better job.
I think some people think that these were nice, compassionate employers who were cooling down the workplace for the workers, but of course nothing could be further from the truth. That was an inadvertent byproduct, but actually this was a quality control device to control the breaking of fibers in cotton mills, to get consistent quality control in these various industries, to control the dust that had bedeviled tobacco stemming room workers for decades. I think the workers obviously went home and to their unair-conditioned shacks in most cases, and talked about how nice and cool it was working during the day. Well, as anybody will tell you who's lived here for very long, even today in the age of air conditioning, there's still plenty of sun and sweat and humidity. It's something you just have to deal with.
It's silly to suffer from the heat when you can afford the modest cost of air conditioning.
By the 1950s, people were air conditioning their homes with standalone window units that could be easily installed. This wasn't just an appliance, it offered a new, cool way of life.
Walking down a typical southern street prior to the air conditioning revolution, you would have seen families, individuals outside. They would have been on their porches, on each other's porches. There was a visiting tradition, a real sense of community. Well, I think all that changes with air conditioning. You walk down that same street and basically what you'll hear are not the voices of people talking on the porch, you'll hear the whir of the compressors.
Guess what we've got? An RCA room air conditioner. I'm a woman, and I know how much pure air means to Mother in keeping our rooms clean and free from dust and dirt.
Control of the cold has transformed city life. Refrigeration helped cities expand outwards by enabling large numbers of people to live at great distances from their source of food. Air conditioning enables cities to expand upwards. Beyond 20 stories, high winds make open windows impractical. But with air conditioning, 100-story skyscrapers were possible.
Technologies emerge which not only worked to insulate human society against the evils of cold, but turned cold into a productive, manageable, effective resource. On the one hand, the steam engine, on the other, the refrigerator. Those two great symbols of 19th century world, which completely changed the society and economy of the planet. All that is part of, I think, what we could call bringing cold to market, turning it from an evil agent that you feared into a force of nature from which you could profit.
The explosive growth of the modern world over the last 2 centuries owes much to the conquest of cold, but this is only the beginning of the journey down the temperature scale. Going lower would be even harder, but would produce greater wonders that promise extraordinary innovations for the future. With rival scientists racing towards the final frontier, the pace quickens and the molecular dance slows as they approach the holy grail of cold, absolute zero.
Stay with us as the race for absolute zero is hotting up next on BBC4 in part 2 of our double bill.